Okay, I think we could start. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this Oratorium Marianum Hall of the University of Wrocław. My name is Marcin Dębicki, and this is a great honor and pleasure for me to invite you to participate in the symposium called the Sociology in Central and Eastern Europe. The symposium is organized, apart from me, with my colleague, Irena Wolska-Zogata. We both represent the same Institute of Sociology, University of Wrocław. Now let me introduce our dear and respectful guests, speakers of the symposium, who agreed to come over to Wrocław and share their knowledge on the sociologies in their countries. Let me start from Professor Elena Danilova, who represents, as you can see, Institute of Sociology, Russian Academy of Sciences. By the way, excuse me for the mistake in the program, because a professor's affiliation in the program is different, and that's our mistake. So the proper affiliation is on the screen, Russian Academy of Sciences. Professor Zuzana Kusa, who represents Slovak Academy of Sciences. Professor Vil Bakirov, who is the head of the Ukrainian Sociological Association. And then we have Professor Liutauras Kraniauskas, University of Klaipėda, member of the board of the Lithuanian Sociological Association. Ladies and gentlemen, in Poland, we are on the eve of a big reform of science and higher education to be implemented. That's why we believe the lectures we are going to hear may help us to understand the whole thing in the broader Central Eastern European context, and maybe it will help us to embed our Polish sociology within this context to see what problems are common, which things are different, and maybe we'll try to find out something peculiar about the sociologies in our region, in Central Eastern Europe. Finally, not to make it too long, this introduction, let me give you three technical remarks. The first one, our speakers, our guests will have 20 minutes each. Afterwards, we'll have some time for questions and discussion, so of course, I hope we'll have a kind of dialogue or conversation here. Right after our symposium, we'll have a chance to see a bit more of the university building. So right afterwards, His Magnificence, Rector of the University of Wrocław, Professor Adam Jezierski himself, will take us for a walk around the most representative, the most, I would say, attractive halls and spaces of the university. So all are welcomed. The walk will take approximately 45 minutes and will be in English. After the walk, we'll have another walk to another venue of the Congress, the Congress Club called Mleczarnia, which is just across the Market Square. It will also be guided. So we'll have a guide, it will also be guided in English, and it will also take approximately 45 minutes, so again, everyone is welcome. The walk with the rector will start, as I said, right after the symposium, so people interested in it are invited just to join me after our symposium. Okay, I think that's more or less enough. Now let's listen to our respectful guests. We'll start from Professor Vil Bakirov with his speech, Sociology in Ukraine, Current Research Agenda. Professor, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Many thanks to organizers of this great event for inviting me and for the opportunity to share some information about what is going on in Ukrainian sociology at the moment. Some words about institutional escape of our sociology. Ukrainian sociologists are united in the Sociological Association of Ukraine. It was created in 1990, and since 1993, we've been a member of the International Sociological Association as a European Sociological Association as well. At the moment, CAU consists of 17 regional branches, practically in all major university centers. We have more than 1,300 individual and 25 collective members. And since 2007, the Sociological Association of Ukraine, okay, and since 2007, the Sociological Association of Ukraine has been based in Kharkiv, and we have here a small but very serious delegation with the vice president of the association, Professor Sokorensky and Dr. Hizhniak. In this slide, you can see the internet, site of our association. You can find it in the internet, of course. Ukrainian sociologist recent years focuses primarily on the problems of the post-Soviet transformation, social transformation, classes and social institutions, middle class, gender, feminism, civil society, social equality. That's the problems which we have studied recent years. Of course, analysis of media, social and mass communications, and their influence on people are interesting us also. For the several years, the agenda of the Ukrainian sociology has been supplemented with such problems as external and internal migration, problem of IDPs, modern war conflicts, occupied territories and their reintegration, and etc. Since the beginning of the military conflict on the east of Ukraine, we've had to study a new social phenomenon for Ukraine, internally displaced persons. These people who fled their homes due to the military actions or social and political conflicts. And so of this phenomenon, but also the ways to help IDPs fit into the new conditions. Some representation about Ukrainian sociology research interest give the titles of 3 international congresses held in recent years. In 2009, it was the first Congress, Sociology in the Situation of Social Uncertainties. In 2013, it was the second Congress, Sociology and Society Collaboration in Crisis. And in 2017, it was the third Congress, New Inequalities, New Conflicts, Ways to Overcome. During these congresses, we had great discussions on many sociological problems of modern Ukraine, our neighbors, and future of the world. 1,500 sociologists participated in these 3 congresses. By the way, many of Polish colleagues participated at these meetings as well. Now we are going to hold the next Congress in 2021. It will be dedicated to the transformation of social institutes in a digital society. Ukrainian sociologists participate in many international projects, including those with Polish colleagues. I have no time to mention all of them, but give only one good example. That's the research project, Students on the Borderlands of Central and Eastern Europe, Identities, Values, Life Plans. Leaders from Polish side, Professor Zielinska, University of Zelena Góra, and from Ukraine, Professor Lyudmila Sokoryanskaya. She's present at this meeting. In order to present the most interesting results of our research, last year we published in English the collective monograph Ukrainian Sociology in the 21st Century, Theory, Methods, Research Results. In this work you can find all the main issues that Ukrainian sociologist focuses on. We brought several copies of this book. I can give speakers, and you can also find this monograph in electronic version at our internet site. Dear colleagues, sociology is trying to reflect the society within which it exists. The sociological agenda is determined by the state of society, of course. This summer, Ukrainian society entered a period of completely unexpected and large-scale transformations. Before our eyes, post-Soviet political architectonics, which existed for about 30 years, is being destroyed, and something is happening to society. What exactly is hard to say. President Poroshenko, in the presidential election in April this year, had suffered a crushing defeat. He was beaten by an absolute beginner in politics, namely artist, comedian, TV star Vladimir Zelensky, who got the support of 73% of voters. Analytics thought that in the forthcoming parliamentary elections, his party of Zelensky, servant of the people, which had recently been registered, and strictly speaking is not a party, of course, would not gain the most votes, and maybe thanks to new president's lack of experience, the center of political influence would move to the parliament and to the government, and Ukraine shift strongly towards strengthening parliamentary presidential form of government. But there were a second surprise. Servant of the people received huge voter support and accordingly 254 seats in parliament from 450. This allowed her to create a new government on her own. Old political elites were instantly swept away, thrown overboard of real politics. All the fullness of power in the country, due to the huge popularity of the new president, fell into the hands of very young, mostly unexperienced politicians. Ukraine did not know before such huge concentration of power in one hand. Instead of parliamentary presidential republic by the constitution, the country has de facto become a presidential, or as they say, even a super presidential republic. What made people of all ages forget about their regional, mental, ethnic, cultural, and other differences and vote similarly in practically all Ukrainian regions? This is a big question for sociology, and I believe that the sociological agenda in Ukraine will be formed under the great influence of this issue. Laying no claim on absolutely correct analysis and corresponding judgments, I'll let myself express some preliminary considerations on the basis of the sociological research. The 2014 presidential elections, last elections, was held immediately after Maidan. Protests of hundreds and thousands of people, during which more than 100 people were shot dead in the governmental district in Kiev. And then the then President Viktor Yanukovych fled to Russia. This protest was provoked by a feeling of deep indignation about authorities who violated human rights and freedoms, behaved in a rude manner. Those events were later called the Revolution of Dignity. In the spring of 2014, Ukrainians had several important expectations that were instigated by the Revolution of Dignity and war. Unfortunately, none of them came true. Moreover, with time, these expectations transformed into 5 huge disappointments, which fact is supported by many sociological research. Disappointment why? 1, war conflict was not stopped. According to all sociological surveys, peace is Ukrainians' #1 priority. This slide shows that, but I not have had time to comment it. Disappointment 2, living standards haven't improved. People understood that the war required some sacrifice and were ready to grin and bear it. But now, 5 years later, they see no real perspective for any improvement. They are dissatisfied with low income, high prices, and the lack of proper conditions for doing business. Disappointment 3, after the Revolution of Dignity, despite its big name, the society didn't feel more dignified. Large-scale corruption involving a lot of representatives of ruling elite is still plaguing the country. These figures support my statement. Disappointment 4. People in Maidan fought against outrageous social and property inequality, and yet today the rich are even richer and the poor poorer. Forgive me, but I not able to illustrate these positions with figures in these slides. Disappointment 5, inconsistency and inefficiency of proclaimed reforms. The government declared about some serious reforms directed at transformation of the major social institutions, court reform, law enforcement reform, medical reform, education reform, and so on. Basically, none of them yielded any decent results. All these frustrations resulted in mass protest voting at the presidential election. People voted not so much for a new candidate as against the old one who in their eyes embodied the powers that didn't meet their expectations and disappointed them. The voters faces the choice, Ukrainian voters faces the choice, whether to prolong post-Soviet neo-patrimonial status quo, threatening to never end, or to make a step towards new risks, uncertainty, and unpredictability, but with some chance for change, for radical reformation of power, and all this despite the military confrontation with Russia. Time is limited. I see, I understand. Let me end with these two conclusions which I can give you. The revenge of pro-Russian forces and Ukraine's return to the orbit of Russian political and economic influence are very unlikely, if possible at all. A new generation of people has emerged with new, modern, post-materialistic, as they say, views who reject the social model demonstrated by Russia, who could see and estimate Western standards of social organization with their own eyes. Conclusion 2, it's also very unlikely that the Ukrainian society will lock itself in the shell of traditional nationalism, whose proponents are few and concentrated in several Western regions of Ukraine. Dear friends, the last saying, speedy integration of new segments of Ukrainian society into the realm of internet, involvement with new media, mass caricature of higher education and general growth of the population's educational level give hope for a more and more active formation of a new political culture, for a more mature civil society, and finally for a replacement of political elites. The situation depicted above is very unstable and very dynamic. It will be changing rapidly and in an unexpected way. Ukrainian society found themselves in a real bifurcation point. That is very interesting for sociologists, and that will be inspiring Ukrainian sociologists for developing their research agenda in the nearest future. My time is finished. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor. Now I'd like to ask our second speaker, Professor Elena Danilova, who will tell us about sociological turns in the studies of Russian transformations, discourses and reality.
Uh, Hello, dear colleagues, and it is really, really big honor to have a speech in such a magnificent, building and hall, and especially with this sort of trying to find how sociology may help humanity, maybe, how to, this kind of thoughts come to my mind because we are sort of magnificent, say. But anyway, we have to talk about problems and issues which could arise from our sociological study and reflections of the history, what we actually passed through 20th century in Russia and the beginning on 21st century. So my presentation will be also stick to the whole title of the conference. I will be, trying to generalize a bit about what is sociology in Russian society, how it developed, what was the main, let's say, ontological visions of the society, and briefly just say something about the previous periods of Russian sociology, Soviet sociology, which of course, as we all there was exchange and so on, and we'll focus mostly on the recent one, and also I will have to make some political implications of what we are doing in sociology and how we can analyze the challenges of contemporary world. So it may seem that Russia is a kind of specific country, and to some extent we all are specific countries, but in my point I would like to argue that that is not that specific, as it may seem, especially in contemporary era. I'm not saying about political things, now I'm saying about sociology. So let me first just to remind you that the whole sociology in Russia started in, let's say, in 19th century. It was Russian sociology in the Tsarist period, and then it becomes more prominent in the beginning of 20th century. And you made, of course, we have to know that there are different, camps of the Russian sociology, as well as sort of ideological camps of Slavophiles and Westernizers. This is all have deep roots in our sociology today as well. You may know, of course, Peter Sorokin, who was, pushed away in 1922 with the other intellectuals. You may know Kovalevsky, who is the first Russian department of sociology in Paris. So there is a kind of core established in sociology in pre-revolutionary time and during the revolution and just Stalin time. As you know, and we all know that in Stalin periods, sociology was forbidden. There was no such a discipline in the university, and also the reflections upon society was done within the kind of philosophical or historical materialism and Marxist, Marxist model of Russian orthodoxy, Russian Marxist orthodoxy. Even the links with the Frankfurt School didn't influence a sort of critical approach of the Russian sociology at that time. So that's why I will start just briefly saying just a few words about Soviet period, because this is the starting point of my reflection of sociology. So sociology at that time was a kind of, established as an academic discipline within many, many struggles of establishing institution. So my own institution was established in 60s and 1968. And there were some many debates how to establish sociology within within what kind of frame of references, so on and so forth. And I think it is for Polish sociologists, it's very, very similar. We had many struggles, and also, I mean, each time in 1968, after Czech events, there was an oppression of sociology, on sociology. In 1980, even in 84, there was again kind of oppression, because, you know, sociology has a task which is already, you can see on the screen, of kind of administrative management and fulfilling this role of belt between population and authority. And, but I have to say here and underline this fact that Russian sociology was not Marxist one, even though it was under the roof of sort of Marxist orthodoxy. In terms of, you know, empirical research approaches, it was exactly functionalist approach. And as you know, Merton, Parsons, Aron were in Russia, the Soviet Union, were acquainted with Russian colleagues, and you know, this generation of 60s, talked to them personally. So this was a kind of area. And the idea of sociology of that time, anyway, was a kind of modernization project which could be efficiently implemented in the USSR. So the idea and ontology of sociology was a complete and positivist, because we have to know what we are doing, we have to control, we have to predict, all this kind of things we know. So it was implemented in the in sort of research agenda and research methodology and tools. And of course the main areas of sociology was quite common. We have all social structure, institutions, and unfortunately here we can't see, okay, and other things which is quite similar. So here I would like to point that we really see the picture of the society as a structural thing which could be somehow managed. Agency was not at that time as a popular thing, and all phenomenological, I mean, all Western theory was a kind of area of sociology where colleagues trying to be critical towards them, but it was a hidden area for developing theory of sociology as such. So this is hidden territory in which sort of reflections on the Western theory was produced. But the mainstream, and I'm mostly talking about mainstream because it will be, otherwise it will be too complicated to talk about many things in sociology. So, as you know, sociology is really, really contestable. So it is really connected with a political agenda and political context. Moreover, I must say that inside sociological and intellectual community, the ideas of perestroika emerged, and there are many, and in this time, Russia was ahead of the other Eastern European countries in terms of how to rearrange society to the, not completely to the capitalism, but maybe introducing, there are many debates. And actually, the most liberal ideas comes from economists and sociologists of the journal Communist. That was a sort of state organ communist. That was ideas that was broadly debateful and debated, and here we have and massive critique of the existing system, which at that period was in stagnation. So actually we need changes, and we actually we may say that many of sociologists participated in these changes. You may know Professor Soslavskaya, Professor Yadov, Professor Levada. I'm talking about prominent sociologists who really contribute to the idea of the better society, which can derive from the oldest system. So, what is changing in the milieu of sociology was established as a discipline. Sociology has different, there are many departments would open, many projects, bigger projects, smaller projects. So the discourses contains a lot of liberal things, and also the idea of ideologization. There is no ideology, so and not communist ideology, first of all, desovietization, and this kind of ideas inspired people to look for the future society. However, in sociology, agenda of sort of post-perestroika and in the years of reform was quite similar to what I observed here in Poland, and thank you to Agnieszka, who also have some similar things. This is about modernization, but the idea of modernization, how to catch up, how to be normal society, this is what is somehow we may see different, actors of these changes. And of course, in these changes, and also from a sociological perspective, the notion of agency is introduced and become the most prominent, field of work. What is agency? Who are active people? So I was working with Vladimir Yadov for a long time, and he was a prominent advocate of the agency or activist approaches. and at that time, it seems very relevant. Very relevant in terms that there are people who may change something, who may participate. So these kind of things were very important. Of course, there are many connections with the Western sociology, translations, curricula. Everything was done, translated. So there was a huge rise of sociology during this time. However, right. So the recent period, which, as you can see, could be seen from the late 80s, so it started to be somehow reflections. And why this reflection is started? Because, one of the reasons that there is definitely, dissatisfaction, as my colleague from Ukraine said, these disappointments. The huge disappointments about social inequality, corruption, all this stuff we have still, by the way. And the deterioration of economy, having no prospects, the huge inequality which for agrarian society was inadmissible. People have started to have resentments. At the same time, in the intellectual level, people started to find sort of alternatives to modernization project of that time. So the debate was about, it is actually the debate about identity of Russia itself and identity of sociology as well. So what way we have to go? There are many, of course, many schools, many traditions, and it is sort of discussions and camps, as you can imagine, different camps of sociologists and social scientists. And the debates was around sort of basic things: universalism or specificity. Should we make our own specific way, or we are specific civilization with specific parameters? That is, the unity and diversity. What about social cohesion? How it's possible to establish social cohesion in so fragmented society, which is contemporary societies everywhere. And also about sociology as a whole. I mean, what is a discipline, what is about? This is, I think, debates which are going on all the time within sociological profession. So it's not, so this is kind of trying to elaborate the sort of theoretical grounds and ideas how we can find different perspectives to look at societies. So there is a paradigmatic views, different theoretical approaches, and this is really connected with this idea of profession, and also nowadays regulation with the universities and academy. So in this sense, we are very, very similar to the rest of the world. In terms of administrative pressure, in terms of financial cuts, in terms of routine and workload of sociology, of sociologists and teachers, and these kind of things we all know. But this somehow reflected in the idea that sociologists, except some of, intellectual individuals, are making their routine work, and also they are in sort of frame of specific requirements of society, of the model. It's I may say this is neoliberal model, because sociology now is a corporation, and university as a corporation, and ruled as a corporation, with all kind of consequences we may notice everywhere. So in this sense, there are sort of reflections about the quality of research, and the gap between theory and practice. So anyway, sociologists somehow feel themselves could feel themselves as a part of society which are working in sort of specific regulation, which is embedded actually in the structures of this regime. And surprisingly, this may be called neoliberal regime in Putin's Russia, because it's all go the same way. So at the same time, this is one thing which I would like to stress. Again, we all understand that there is a kind of stagnation in society, and we have to find the way, and we have to find an agency. Who is this people? So in our studies, I think this is quite common for all. The agency is attributed to elites, businesses, authorities, power, movements, where that is what we may see, what is on the surface of our life. We may see protest movements, we may see movement consequences, whatever. And At the same time, I would like to say that the one moment is missing. We do not attribute agency to ordinary people. It somehow happened that ordinary people who are living absolutely ordinary life, who are outside of politics, who are in our surveys, they are uneducated, they have low income, they live in villages and small towns. These kind of categories we always use in survey saying that there is a rest of population without attributing any agency to this kind of population, by the way, which is majority of population. In Russian society, there is a big share of poor people. Big share of poor people. Poverty is one of them. But there are another thing. In Russian societies, there is a huge gap, huge inequality gap as well. So, anyway, in the discourses, this is kind of people who we categorize as poor, as has unintended views, whatever, and discourse reproduces it. Most of us are looking at this kind of elite or business or power and authority, whatever, and sociologists themselves are interested in this because they provide knowledge for authority, of course, for public opinion poll, this kind of things, they classify these things. But the point of agency is missed. And what happened actually, that these ordinary people, in fact, has an agency because they vote. And in this sense, we have surprise. We have surprise in Western democracy and manipulation. And we have manipulation in the Russian society. Because what is the part of legacy, part of legitimation of Putin is that he gradually changed his rhetorics and applied to this part of society. In his language, in speeches, and that makes him justified. He has kind of support of these ordinary people. And that's why easy to play game. To play game. We have, as you know, many of us, we have external agenda and internal agenda. And it's easy to attribute particular things to external agenda to make people think that there is a sort of special time we live to make them cohesive. And also about internal agenda, there are debates how to, it's more or less more debates, there are different camps, but anyway, there is no measures to reduce inequality, there is no measures to reduce, there are measures, but you know, it's all not that effective as it might be. In this sense, so things are left as it is now, and this is a kind of thing I think we have to think about sociological agenda and what kind of, you know, research or ideas could be done in terms of understanding these ordinary people. There is no big protest in Russia, but it does not mean that people are satisfied. That is a big point. And we have, for example, I have a friend of mine in France, in Paris, just to say some words about yellow jackets, that's people coming into the streets. And they also are quite ordinary people with the soda. But as we saw this during the conference, I saw a very nice slide, that there is no political voice, there is no political party which can sue them. So the same things could be said about Russia. There is of course official and oppositional officials system and unsystematic opposition, but the main thing is mistrust into politics. So we have to know how they live. That is the end. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have two interesting presentations, lectures behind us. Now there's time for Professor Liutauras Kraniauskas with his lecture of a quite intriguing title, Lithuanian Sociology as Production of Contested Knowledge, National Hobbits, Global Wizards, and Administrative Orcs. Please, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Martin. And I would like to express my gratitude to organizers inviting here to share my ideas about sociology. Usually sociologists like to talk a lot about sociology, so I'm the same like you. And of course the metaphors of pop culture which are on the title are implying, just from my point of view, just a normative dimension, but they are trying, how to say where the evil and where the good is lying. But from my point of view, the most important words are adjectives, not nouns. Absolutely no. Okay. First of all, I would like to say that 2 days ago, I really enjoyed presidential session during this conference, because it was just like seeing how seeing a performative space of collective identity where the presidential speeches were trying to produce and reproduce mythologies, main mythologies of sociology. They were talking about the idea of emancipation, discourses about social change, civil society, public sociology, sociology of underdogs, I call, or unprivileged people. They were trying to bring idea of normativity back to sociology and say that you have to always think about your business, what are you doing, in normative way. Of course, it is not a joke what I'm saying, because this ritual performance of professional identity, it could not happen otherwise, because the speeches of presidents who are keeping symbolical power, they're always trying to empower us. It is like in support group of Homo sociologicals anonymous, that you are trying to find motivation, why you're here in, this society, and what are you doing. My ideas, which I'm going to present about Lithuanian sociology, are well grounded in a so-called sociology of sociology. It might sound a little bit weird or bizarre, but this idea, which was promoted by Alvin Goldner in his book, The Coming Crisis of Western Sociology, that usually, if you are a sociologist, you have to be very reflective about yourself. It means not to give reflections about society, but you have to give also reflections about your ideas, to locate yourself in social situation, and even to say, why are you producing particular kind of discourse, why are you producing particular kind of ideas, and connect those ideas with the situation in which you are working. It is the first level of reflexivity. And of course, Goldner said, there is even the second and the third level of reflections. It means that you have to be reflecting your reflections of yourself. It means stepping up more and more and more, and he said that it is a nightmare of sociological imagination, that you always have to position yourself within ideological field. At the moment, I will leave, talk about ideology, but I will bring later on, and I'll show you some data. When we are talking about sociology, I think that, of course, like any other social science or any other academical discipline, it is in the field of tensions. And tensions are, how to say, produced by different discourses. You can say discourse of emancipation, and on the other hand, we have discourse about meaning in the service of power, that you have to rationalize different kind of systems of control. You can say there are sociological studies, how to say, just to get knowledge, but there are labor market demands, etc., etc., etc. And I think that a lot of our, how to say, anxieties are coming from those tensions which are within the field. There are a lot of pragmatical interests. That is, and I think that everybody knows that why you're troubled about particular kind of ideas, what are your everyday troubles, everyday, how to say, issues which you have to confront with your colleagues. In 2012, with my colleague, Zjazd, he's a philosopher, we tried to map social sciences in Lithuania. We are doing like a discourse analysis of construction of value in social sciences. We are just trying to find out how people understand, doing different kind of research, what is the value, where it lies, how to say, what is valued more. And we mapped social sciences using Canadian sociologist square. It is a square of Michel Lamont, which distinguished three different epistemological styles. It was quite easy done for us. We tried to map. Of course, sociology lies in more constructivistical mode of thinking, but we will also try to map where tensions are going else in this, how to say, in this field of social sciences and humanities. Of course, there are epistemological tensions. For example, of course, there are domination coming from natural sciences, which are trying to bring to sociology naturalistic approach. Of course, there are more humanistical points of view, which are trying to base their research on interpretivist position. But also, we have what we call administrative tensions and strengths, which you usually, how to say, demanded to publish on national level, to produce knowledge for national audience, or produce knowledge or a few messages for international audience. Short historical, how to say, excursion to Lithuanian sociology in 1997. In 1997, how to say, why I'm talking about 1997, because the structure, how sociology was institutionalized, it's still having a huge effect, how we are understanding and how we are behaving in this field of sociology. In 1997, there were, how to say, two types of institution. There was one type of institutions which were established in late 60s, early 70s. They were mainly, how to say, based on functionalist tradition, about which was mentioned by Yelena. It was Institute of Philosophy, Sociology and Law, and also Kaunas University. They were usually oriented to making empirical research. And on the other hand, we have universities which started sociology study programs in 1989, how to say, and it's happened that sociological study programs started with national revival movement. And in 1997, I could say there was a real huge divide between those institutions. And this divide was not only institutional, but it was generational. Because in earlier institutions like Kaunas Technology University or Institute of Philosophy or Sociology and Law, people were in their 40s, in their 50s, and they are still reproducing Soviet sociology, how to say, ideas, what sociology should look like. But on the other hand, we had universities which were trying to bring absolutely different ideas and try to promote absolutely different discourse. What is sociology? It was the main idea of universities were understood that they were trying to bring a global discourse theoretical discourses, how to say, to students and to show how it looks like. This divide was well reflected in publications. Of course, we had two journals, one established in 1990, it was Philosophy and Sociology. It was established by Academy of Science. Usually they were printing empirical research, and more theoretical-oriented journal, Sociology, Thought and Action, was established in 1997. And it was interesting that they were trying, sociologists were trying to bring translations of classical text, to talk about postmodernism, to talk about more theoretical issues, and it was really very interesting for me as a student in that time, that when I was reading Sociology, Mintis and Veiksmas, Sociology, Thought and Action, I was really enjoying readings, but when I was switching to philosophy and sociology, philosophy and sociology, I was really amazed why people are talking about national security, about intervention of the state into ordinary life, about management, etc. It was really a huge surprise. Nowadays, we have more players in the field. More universities are trying, how to say, due the liberation of educational system, started to provide sociological study programs. Yeah, they started to publish a lot of journals. I would say that we have approximately 6 normal journals published in Lithuania, sometimes in English, a few articles which are still existing in Lithuania. And of course we have Sociological Society, which organizes annual conferences or annual congresses each autumn. This autumn there will be also a conference held in Vilnius, and we invited Michael Burovoy to give a speech about public sociology. So that means that it is a field. How big is sociological community? I cannot say. It doesn't matter that I belong, how to say, to the board of Lithuania Sociological Society. I don't know how many sociologists are, but just to give idea from different figures, just to imagine how sociology might be compared with other social sciences or humanities. I just try to put figures. It is as number of publications which were published during the last 5 years. You can see that sociologists are somewhere in the middle. It is not a huge community. I have to remind that in Lithuania sociology is a very broad category where all residual sciences or disciplines usually are attached, and we have to share place with human geography, social work, studies of social policy, criminology, demographics, sometimes hybrid identities coming from educational sciences, etc. It means that a community of sociologists are quite small, and I'd like to say that from this diagram you can see that the biggest communities are those who are working in management and administration research, and also in educational sciences, in social sciences. Yeah? Reproductive behavior of sociologists, it's quite okay. It is like just number of PhD theses for already 25 years. It is quite stable. Production, what we are doing, it is also just quite stable, I would say. It is just number of scholarly publications in sociology published during the last 18 years. Why I'm showing those figures? Just to imagine how sociologists are working, how to say, and to show not only ideas, but are very, how to say, captive. And usually you are talking with other people about ideas, you're going to discussions, but I'd just like to show the figures which usually, how to say, are expressed like indicators of your ordinary behavior, like of your ordinary actions. Writing hard for urbe et orbe, for the world and for the city. Of course, a very interesting debate in social sciences and humanities in Lithuania, how much you are publishing internationally. If you are trying to compare publications published in national language and in English, I always observe a very interesting trend that sociology is more close to humanities than to social sciences. It means that sociologists are producing knowledge, how to say, for local communities. They're trying to communicate in national language, how to say, but not to speak for big, huge, global audiences. Sociological publications, how to say, books or chapters in books, during the last also 18 years, you can see that the number of publications in English, book chapters, usually I say it is those like chapters in edited books. I don't like this genre. I don't like edited books, but because I think that if you are writing a chapter in an edited book, it means you are digging the hole, putting your publication, and burying. Nobody is going to read books. Yeah, but here you can see how to say how idea of internationalization is getting on into our sociological community. Articles, peer review articles published. Also interesting figures that since 2012 we can see a trend that publications in national language is decreasing. Why I'm worrying about it? Because usually when you are trying to produce sociology in your national language, you are playing with a style. You are playing with argument. You are trying, how to say, to bring different concepts, to play with different audiences, and it's how to say, for your national identity, because you have to reproduce sociologies in your own country, in your own language, and it's very important. When we are looking at the pattern of international publications, I would say that from 2008, you can see that the pattern is quite stable. It's not changing, and it's very interesting. In this hall, we have my PhD supervisor, Zenonas Norkos. And once he said, if you are going to be a teacher, it is usually, how to say, like a proverb or a talk in USA. If you're going to be a teacher or a preacher, you're going to teach other people how to live, there is a million. It's a very rational question. I can bring a figures and say, that is our million, and we can teach and preach. In this diagram, I tried to put figures coming from the Research Council in Lithuania, which is, how to say, the main institution providing funds different diagram. You can see that sociologists during the last 10 years managed to win a lot of projects in comparison with other sizes. The bubble, the size of the bubble are, how to say, number of projects. The x-axis are budget in euros, and the y-axis are success rate. It means how many publications how many applications you are writing, and how many are you winning. And you can say that sociology, in comparison with, sociology is here. Sorry, how to say, possibly this computer, how to say, broke my diagram. Sociology is here. Yep. It is a green bubble. Yeah, it's a green bubble. So how we can treat? There are possible different explanations or different interpretations. If you are taking managerial point of view, you can say, you are successful guys. You have necessary skills, how to put arguments, how to compete with others for funding. You are very, how to say, rich man. You are agents of neoliberalism living in a comfort during the last 10 years after the global financial crisis. It is just one possible discourse. On the other side, I would say that possibly sociology is more vulnerable tribe with a neoliberal university because they cannot secure funding for their research and they are pushed to apply funding from external sources. It is, I'm very sorry for this graph, but I would say that economics are here are educational sciences, and if you remember the previous chart, educational sciences are the biggest community writing in Lithuania. So it's very important just to think what is the pushing factors why you're behaving in particular kind of mode. Also, there is another possible explanation that sociologists who are winning a lot of projects on competitive basis, they are adjusting to the dominant ideology or to the dominant discourse, or in other way we can say that they are shaping this dominant discourse. What is the way, which interpretation is, how to say, more valuable? It also depends on your stance, how you're going to treat this data, how you're going to work, and how you're considering your working condition. Are you feeling tensions or not? I will skip one slide, and I'm going to another interesting topic, which is a Polish-Lithuanian research funding initiative, which were opened in 2018, DINA. The Lithuanian Research Council is participating, and also Narodowy Center Nauki, Narodowy Center Nauki, National Center of Sciences, who are also trying to perform or to open funding opportunities for different institutions in collaboration, international collaboration. And it was very interesting that the interest in this initiative, which were opened for the first time in 2018, we got 81 research application of social sciences. I would say it's quite huge. 14 applications were supplied by different sociological teams. Those are connections of different universities. Yeah, you can see the list who are participating. And strangely enough, from those 81 research applications, there were just 4 winners. It means success rate is 5%. When you are thinking about those 5%, you always can understand what is a psychological effect of funding scheme which might affect your understanding and your definition. 5% are good, 29 are not so good. Is it right or is it not? I would say no. 98% are still good. But how to say, idea that you're losing, it is like symbolical humiliation of your identity coming from different kind of financial understanding from ideology which are, how to say, produced by different institutions. In this slide, which I skipped, I tried to dissect so-called collective mind of Lithuanian sociologists. They were providing applications. I tried to visualize different keywords just to find out how it looks, how people are thinking, in what kind of categories. And from my point of view, that many categories, they are reproducing all mythologies of sociology, of underdogs and privileged social groups. You are taking care about gender, you are taking care about aging people, you are taking care about child, but also you are trying to bring, not how to say you, but sociologists are trying to build idea of the policy. It means that idea of the policy is rationalization of patronizing system of administrative control. You are trying to give a state to the state, to the administrative, how to say, administrators, systems, how people might be managed and controlled. And of course, when you are trying to take this position, you are securing your symbolical power through paternalistic stance. You are taking care You are in a more normative position, but from my point of view, you're always subordinating your academical freedom for this neoliberal state. If I am looking at the same structure coming from the DINA, from the DINA, I would say that ideas of international collaboration are more open, and they are usually working not only with neoliberal state, how to say, they are not trying to sell a product for the state, asking money, but people are interested in more social processes, what is going like a dynamics, and state is somewhere left behind. It's quite interesting that the only one project of sociologists were among 4 winners, and from my point of view it was also a good indicator how this neoliberalism has been working. It was a project collaboration between private institution. In Lithuania it is public policy and management institution. It is just like think tank, idea of the think tank, house organization, which are trying to produce policy. And from the Polish side, it was SWPS University, it is a private university of social sciences and humanities. Yeah. From my point of view, those are good indicators that how to say national universities are losing the battle for resources, and we have quite clear vision that a new generation, we are trying to build a little bit different models of sociological research, of sociological organizations, are taking their chance. What is the future? I think that the future is more promising than, how to say, my vision of sociology, but we always have to think about limitations and ideological illusions of those promises about funding, about your possibilities, about opportunities. And we have to always think what kind of role we are performing like ideological agents. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we have next presentation, number 4, by Zuzana Kusa, Sociology Without Successors, Sociological Institutions, Publications, and People in Slovakia.
Possibility to be here and to be one of presenters and to learn also about the state of art of sociology and society also in our neighbor countries or near neighbor countries. So I am working at Institute for Sociology of Slovak Academy of Science, and perhaps my view on situation of Slovak sociology will be a bit different than the situation of colleagues who work at universities and were much more touched by reform of educational systems. So perhaps their knowledge of situation will be more useful to you and perhaps more optimistic than that of mine. I will speak about institutional developments, about personal development, orientation of research, and consequence for surviving of sociology in Slovakia. As we need to look at the world and life, and also life of sociology from the bright side of it. So first I will always try to look it from this bright side, or at the bright side of sociology. So if we compare years 1990 and 2019, we can find evidence of development of sociology in Slovakia, especially institutional development. We have a much more department of sociology and many new departments, new in comparison of 1990, of social work and politology. We have still 2 training centers for PhD students, which are crucial for reproduction of academic of sociology. We have 1 sociological journal more, but the first older one, Sociologia, Slovak Sociological Review, is indexed in International Social Index, and so is very demanding side of publication. Slovak Sociological Association, SSA, was a local organization in 1990. There was Czechoslovak Sociological Association working in former Czechoslovakia, which was a member of International Sociological Association, but it operated only on the territory of Czech lands of Czechoslovakia. In the end of common state, our Czech and Slovak sociologists commonly applied for membership in ISA, and no one wished to be the only successor, so we entered the International Sociological Association shoulder by shoulder in friendly cooperation in 1993. The number of private research institutes grew also strikingly. There was no social research data archive in that time, in 1990. Now we have Slovak Archive of Social Data, which is accessible free of charge. Now also the funding opportunities increased immensely, and we have 1 academic funding agency which funds research projects which are based only on research interests in elementary or fundamental research. No pools or from outside. So very briefly about our 2 strongest institutional infrastructure pillars, Journal of Sociologia and Slovak Archive of Social Data. It is important perhaps to know that Slovak Sociologia, Slovak Sociological Review published 2 issues in English language, and publication in this journal is of interest of many sociologists and social scientists from abroad. At present, or in last 10 years, about the half of all publications in this journal were not from Slovak sociologists or Slovak political scientists, but from our colleague from Czech Republic and also from other countries. Sociologia has very demanding anonymous peer review procedures. Perhaps it is also difficult to publish there for Slovak colleagues, because the refuse rate is about 70%, so it is really demanding and strict to preserve scholarly standards. Now, something from the dark side of institutional life. It is the budget, state budget from funding research and education in general. You can see that the percentage of the GDP in Slovakia is very low, perhaps a bit similar to that of Poland. But both budgetary share or percentage share are almost half of the European Union average. So the funding of research and education is a general problem in Slovakia and in some neighbor countries, and this problem touches not only sociologists but also many other research disciplines. You can see in red field the number of sociologists at the Institute for Sociology, Slovak Academy of Science, that is my institute, how the number of sociologists working in this academic institution dropped from 39 in 1990 to only 17 in 2019. This personal politics is also motivated by the need to preserve wages in Sociological Institute and Academy of Science on a somewhat competitive level with the wages in a private institution, and to have chance to hold sociologists in the academy. So the salaries are average, on the average level, but at the expense of diminishing number of colleagues and following problems with forming a research team around some topics. The next, not very bright information about institutional development of sociology in Slovakia refer first to the 90s, where several public research institutes affiliated to ministries were cancelled. There were many positions in companies for sociologists cancelled. The majority sociologists worked as a firm or company sociologist under the communist regime, and during the economic reform, the companies first of all got rid of administration, and so sociologists were on the floor among the administration. And as a consequence, the very strong section of Slovak Sociological Association, section of sociology of work, ceased to exist in the 90s because nobody worked there. There was also internal brain drain from sociology to social work and politology departments, which really develop very intensively in this period, and also to private sectors. And this internal brain drain in the 90s had its consequence also for present day. Now, when we draw structural funds from European structural funds, we have new job opportunities for sociologists in analytic centers of ministries. to make public policy more evidence-based. European Union promotes such analytic centers, but working in these centers is more or less not publicly visible, and the communication with sociologists working in these analytic centers almost doesn't exist, and they do not take part in, for instance, sociological association events or do not publish in sociological journal. As I also already suggested, by the data from Institute for Sociology, the problematic part of Slovak Sociological Association is the number of people inside sociological institution. You can see the number of academic sociologists which are very low. There is important to add, or fair to add, that those who are scattered at other social science departments are not lost in that department. My two distinguished colleagues who participate in this Polish Sociological Congress are so-called scattered, but one is the director of the Institute of Prognosis of Slovak Academy of Science, and one is very important and influence scholars in sociology of social inclusion. Both of them are very important figures in this field. It is Richard Filczak and Daniel Skobla who are here. Thank you to say this. There are common critical words about the 90s in Slovak sociology, and these critical words concern the empiricist nature of doing sociology in the 90s, which was also strengthened by the idea that the transformation situation in post-communist countries is a very unique historical situation, and the duty of sociologists is to collect the authentic data of this very unique situation. And there was no interest or understanding that this situation was not at all unique, and that we could have learned very much from privatization and reform processes in many European so-called Western democracy, and lack of this theoretical knowledge makes Slovak sociology prone to taking interpretative frames from other sciences, especially from political sciences, but very often from the think tank experts with neoliberal orientation. Despite this neglect of sociology theory, and despite the pressure to be engaged in new and new research projects to collect the money for the institute, there are some sociologists who were able to very stubbornly follow one research line and study and try to put their research within the context of international sociology and learn from similar researches in other countries. And so these are colleagues who are now able to publish in international journals or international volumes in the first rank publishing house, or also published individually, like the, for instance, book of my younger colleague Miloslav Bahna, Cross-Border Care, published in such a publishing house. So we already heard something about fragmentation of research, which is in this underpopulated sociology a bit dangerous, because we are witnesses of dying of some research branches or research program when the key personality of this research orientation died. Many important sociologists in important fields are very lonely figures in Slovakia, and their sociology, or this branch sociology, is really in risk when they are going to leave academy. Sociology is and has not been very visible in Slovak public space, often because journalists call every social scientist, analyst or expert, and sociologists did not insist on their sociological identity. Also, the sociological identity becomes not clear, because many other social sciences like ethnologists, political sciences show similar knowledge, similar expertise, also research techniques and interpretation frames if they have. Majority of Slovak sociologists appear in public only reactively. Only few of us, fortunately all we are here now, publish their columns in some newspapers. According the interest in sociology study, it is clear that our discipline become visible and appealing to young people only in situation when our colleague Professor Iveta Radičová was appointed Minister of Labor, and then ministry, the Prime Minister of the government. So this peak in 2010, it is the time when she was in the head of Slovak Republic. And then the interest in study sociology come down. So there is also intervention of demographic trends that touch also political sciences. You see in this blue frame that political sciences are much more appealing to public, and very sad numbers are that from 2018 where only less than 100 Slovak students apply for sociological study on the territory of all republic, and only 35 were enrolled in the study. There are sociologists who study, or young people who study sociology in Czech Republic or more in the West, but there is very rare if somebody returns home. So sociological institutions are very relatively well established and they are in demand of non-sociologists, as it is evidence from publication in the journal Sociologia. But sociological institutions which are populated by sociologists are not winners in scientometric assessment, because the problem is not publishing in foreign foreign well-ranking journal. Public profile of sociology is fuzzy, and there is declining interest in sociological study. So there is a possibility that sociology in Slovakia will survive, but as an institutional infrastructure which will be maintained by people who did not study sociology. So we will survive, but they will be not us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much too. Okay, so we are done with the presentations. I'd like to say thank you to all the speakers. Thank you very much for your insightful presentations. A wide range of issues has been covered. So we've heard about funding, publishing, historical issues, top issues, and many others. We've got kind of, as I said, insightful presentation or analysis of the national sociologies, but at the same time, I think all the sociologists, together with the Polish one, seem to have quite a lot in common. I would say so much in common that sometimes it's legitimate to say that our national sociologies turn out to be a part of a bigger system in which we need to participate, sometimes take part in a kind of rat race, sometimes struggle for existence, sometimes to be competitors between us as scholars, sometimes between institutions as well. That's my short remark, but I would like to open up discussion now. So we're all looking forward to hearing your questions, comments, doubts, or anything else. So please, the time is yours now. Okay.
Okay, thanks for some excellent presentations. I come from Romania, in fact from the largest university, public university in Romania, Babeș-Bolyai University in Cluj, and I am amazed to see the extreme similarities between the dynamics in other countries compared to developments in Romania. It's in terms of the public visibility of sociology, it's very low. The number of practitioners here is rather low. Pressures coming from all sides, chronic underfunding and lack of resources. And my question would be that it's obvious that regionally we are facing similar problems, and it's clear that there are some common processes at play that bring all these countries in a region and bring sociology in these countries under such severe stress, to the point that we witness a massive deprofessionalization inside the discipline. What happens in Romania and probably in your countries is we essentially survive because we teach human resources, not sociology. Which do you think are those processes that have brought us here? And beyond that, do you think maybe that it's time to take a more anti-disciplinary stance, in the sense that we acknowledge that the pressures brought about by all the things associated with neoliberalism, like an emphasis on efficiency, management, increased productivity, and so on, should be acknowledged as such as problems for the discipline, and maybe we should strive beyond the national framework to do something together and to redefine this discipline along different lines. The end result might even be very radical, not having sociology or having something completely different that we term sociology in the end. Thanks.
Say something? So, if I understand properly, because the acoustic here is not so good as this beauty of the building. In Slovakia, many sociologists continue their work in cooperation, for instance, with geographers or ethnologists. So they find alliance in close disciplines, but in my view, the sociological training, especially in theoretical framework, is very important and cannot be replaced by another discipline. For instance, geography is very empiricist in my view, and the lack of theoretical framing led to very superficial analysis and inability to make a critical interpretation of the data in the 90s. So I think that the study of sociology and the sociology department are not replaceable without bad costs.
Any of you would like to comment upon the question? Yes? Yep. If you have something to add.
I think that the interdisciplinary point is very important now. And actually the policy is how we combine sociological knowledge and also technology. This is the huge challenge of this artificial intelligence and the brain and the science of earth, whatever, and pollution, ecology, whatever. But the problem is that sociology in these particular areas could be supplementary. It's the idea is that it could be like supplementary to finding out the consequences, social situations around the particular things. But in this sense, there is a danger that sociology itself, as a humanist project, are in sort of danger.
I'd like to make one comment on interdisciplinarity or multidisciplinarity. You can name one or another way. Idea of interdisciplinary research and opening boundaries of different disciplinary fields is already, from my point of view, for 40 years going on, but somehow it's happening that those boundaries are still existing. There are 2 points. One is why you need this interdisciplinarity. It is a huge question usually when we are talking, for example, with natural sciences, and you are saying, okay, we are doing sociological research, please join us, please bring us different gadgets or statistical procedures, models, just to play with our data. They are saying, come on, You're trying, how to say, to exploit us. You are liking just, how to say, you'd like to enjoy our gadgets and our methods, but you are not trying, how to bring our mind. You are asking us to do, how to say, dirty work, how to say, to making publications. There are a lot of resistance. On the other side, it's happened for me already for 10 years to be involved in different expert panels when we are evaluating projects, applications for research projects. In Lithuanian Research Council in 2010, 2012, there were decision to organize different stream of projects which were called multidisciplinary. And the main problem for the experts were that they could not find arguments or criteria how to evaluate those projects. They always were trying to push responsibility, and they're saying, we don't know how this project will work. It is possibly, how to say, those from social sciences or those from natural sciences will say something. People from social sciences or natural sciences, they say, no, it's not our business. We are not taking responsibility. And it was really quite funny thing that people were pushing responsibility out from them, and Lithuanian Research Council decided to quit those streams, to stick to quite clear definitions of disciplinary fields. And of course, we cannot forget that we are working in very clear legislative environment, where by the law you have clear division of any scientific activity. So you always have to think not only about intentions coming from the sociological community or community of scholars, but you always have to think about this legislative strains, how to say, framework of rules, of regulations, which usually are defining what you have to do and what you have to be.
I'd like to stress the very serious thing. We have heard from our Slovak colleagues that in Slovakia they are going to survive as sociological institute without people, without persons who are especially trained and educated as sociologists. In Ukraine, we see very big problem. We observe that a couple of last years, the interest of young people in sociology declined very much. And in Ukraine, about 50, maybe 60, maybe more universities propose sociological training, sociological educational programs, including not universities, but technical institutes, agricultural, and so on. They thought maybe that sociology is a profession which could give to young people more money, more prestige, more power, and so on. But young people see that sociologists are not very rich persons. The sociology is not very serious professional for enrichment, for successful professional career. And in last year we see as universities are not able to enroll more or less enough quantity of young people to study sociology. In our university, by the way, in our university, Kharkiv Karazin University, and by the way, Maxim Kovalevsky, which has been mentioned before, is alumni of the university, our university. In our university was the first university which opened the sociological educational department in Ukraine. But we see that we are not able to enroll students. And what is the way? I think is to combine pure sociology, it my opinion, has no future in the modern world. Pure academician sociology is not perspective. And we have to combine sociology with something other. In our case, we had combined it with social communications, with public relations, with advertisement. And this works. We are a lot of people who are trying to be sociologists, but not pure sociologists, but simultaneously reclamist, public relation specialists, and so on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We have two more people willing to. Yes.
Hello, I'm Viktor Marzec from Institute for Social Studies, University of Warsaw. You mentioned some of successful examples of, let's say, individual strategies of overcoming the institutional misery of the semi-peripheries, yeah, of all our countries. And I wanted to ask you about your reflections about these strategies. So I know some of these stories. I use various strategies as well to somehow get by in the global world of academic production. But I also know that this requires very particular steps, and not every strategy is effective here. Yeah? We have to really take a very specific position within this structured global academic production to be able to be somehow attractive on the academic market, and sometimes it's also connected with, let's say, delivering a raw material for instance, global production of knowledge, yeah, as perhaps peripheral countries usually do. So I wanted to ask you, how do you see, for instance, your own entanglements in this matter, in that matter, and how can you, for instance, reflect on these strategies which were taken by your colleagues, for instance, which you find somehow effective, productive, but as well, of course, having their own price in that matter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I can now use my PhD qualification biographic approach in sociology, and also observation, qualitative method. So two of my colleagues who are present at Polish Sociological Congress did their PhD study abroad, and perhaps made enough not only personal contact, but got many personal challenging patterns of how sociological work should proceed, what is important and what is the less important. And they are keeping contact with their former colleagues from PhD studies and new colleagues from the sociological discipline they chose to do research in. The next three persons who I mentioned in my presentation also they made their PhD in Slovakia. No, one girl made it in Brno, but all they chose their PhD topic because of deep personal interest, and kept this personal interest and selectively chose sociological conference and all scientific events which are close to their interests, so they do not like to go to this general sociological gathering, but keep this special branch focused meeting. And they are very also strongly engage or in touch with their international scientific colleagues, and so they swim in international scientific sea with them. So.
Do they cover Slovakian topics or not? What is the pattern of topic choice?
All of them study empirically Slovak topics. For instance, not only Slovak, because one of them studied the migration of Slovak abroad, so it also concerned these receiving countries. But all of them are theoretical, very well developed. And so they are able to speak about the more general problems, and Slovak data, Slovak situation is one of the example of general tendency or general sociological problems. So this is important that they are really theoretical high and able combine several theoretical approaches. So, for instance, test the relevance of sociological approach to the selective problems, and really it needs different type of engagement in and study of sociology, not only collecting data, because data about Slovakia are really not interesting without a strong theoretical interpretative frames. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Our time is slowly coming to an end, but I think we have two more people willing to ask the question. But my request would be to make the question relatively short, and so should be the answer, okay?
Yes, thank you very much. Izabela Grabowska, SWPS University of Social Sciences and Humanities. Thank you for this lively panel. And I really liked, especially Ukrainian and Russian presentations, because they show that we are dealing with societies which are true life laboratories. And my question here is about the long tradition in sociology of longitudinal studies. Do you conduct, in such circumstances of dynamically changing societies, longitudinal studies? Is it the tradition, is it hold there in your countries, both in Russia and in Ukraine? Either quantitative, or now there are new approaches to qualitative longitudinal studies. That's one question. Another question, I think I was called to the board by our Lithuanian contributor, and luckily for you, I am 5% happy PI of DINA 1 research program. And I don't think that the comment of yours was fair, saying that non-public universities or non-public participants of the competitions take money from public universities. Please look at our scientific performance. Top, A+, A across the university. Our partner in Lithuania, which is, of course, Policy Institute, is also very, very qualified. And we do our taxpayers to the budget which DINA program was created. So I know that you teased the audience with this argument, and I really appreciate your talk, but I don't think it was a fair argument. Thank you very much.
I'll take the floor. That is my argument. Of course, we are getting into ideological battle. You are representing one ideology, I am representing another ideology. But the main idea, it is just showing, how to say, figures. It's to send a quite clear message that organizational structures which are working, how to say, and in which we are, how to say, imposed to work or framework ideological in which we are working, sometimes it might be damaging. And when you are winners, you always, how to say, drinking champagne. If you are losers, we always crying and complaining. But who is better, you or me? I always say, both of us are quite good enough, but there are not enough money or funding coming from the state. It means, how to say, we are neglected, like a community of sociologists, of social sciences. That is the idea. Not to say that, how to say, we are jealous that you won and we lost. No. It is just idea that we have to switch our focus from competition between us to those who are organizing such kind of competitions. And we have to make a criticism of the state, but not of criticism of, how to say, small institutions or those who are organizing fundings. That was my idea. I always thinking that any idea which is going for competitive funding, it's always worth to be funded, despite the fact how it's bizarre, how it's weird, etc. Because usually you are belonging to a particular kind of community which is producing those ideas in which they believe. I strongly believe that the field of higher education and research will go very rapid transformations in the next 5 years, that a lot of smaller institutions will be the most important players within the field in comparison with all universities. That is.
But that's the quality of science. Come on, so doing good science.
It's not only the quality of science. Just argument one more argument. It is not only the quality of science. Of course, you can say that peer panel or review panel are corrupted, are supported, or neutral, are objective, or very subjective, etc. Usually, I would like to say that universities, for example, from teams who are going for competitive funding, universities are demanding, for example, to bring 30% of overhead expenses from each project. When we are talking about private institutions cannot, how to say, they are playing with a little bit different scheme, how they can distribute those money within institution. And it is really a serious problem that it is not criticism of private universities or think tanks or those who are coming. It is just idea of criticism of the state.
Okay, let's stick to the first question.
Me? As far as I understood, because it's bad acoustic here, you are interested in what is in tradition. I mean, the Russian sociology pre-revolution. Yeah, the problem is that we have kind of old generation sociologists who did this work, and I mean, there are several of them, very few. There is a project now called sort of a Russian sociology of pre-revolutionary and post-revolutionary time. I mean, there is an idea, but it's difficult to, I mean, there are very, very few people who may do this properly, and young generation is not really a young scholar. There are some young scholars, so this is a problem of specialists, and there are very limited. This is very, very specific work. You know, historiography, this is really, really, you know, very specific, and not many people do, but the project exists, yes.
Yes.
Sorry, I beg your pardon, but I'm not sure that I understood your question properly. So, if you won't mind, I am ready to meet you just in a couple of minutes. And if you clarify your question, I'll try to answer. And let me, as a small compensation, thanks a lot for high estimation of our presentations. And let me, as a small compensation for this not full answer, to give you this book in which you can find some very interesting materials about Ukrainian sociology in modern time.
Okay, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we need to finish our discussion. Our time is up, so I'd like once again to say thank you to all the speakers and our guests for coming and sharing your knowledge, and all of you who wanted to contribute to our discussion. As I said, soon, very soon, we are starting the walk around the main building, guided by the rectors, so I think we'll start just in a minute. Thank you very much.